Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked around with wide eyes. The space station was huge, bigger than any building he had ever seen back home in Montana. Shiny metal walls stretched up so high he could not see the top. Lights blinked everywhere in colors he did not have names for. Other students walked past him in the hallway. Jake had never seen aliens before, and now he was surrounded by them. A tall blue girl with long arms walked by. Her skin looked like the sky on a clear day. Behind her came a creature that looked like a giant spider, but it wore clothes and carried books just like any student would. Jake picked up his backpack and started walking. He had studied pictures of different alien species before coming here, but seeing them in person was different. A group of crystal-like beings stood near a window. They made soft musical sounds when they moved, like wind chimes on his grandmother's porch. The Nexus Prime Academy was the best school in the galaxy. Jake could not believe he was actually here. Only the smartest students from each planet got to attend. He was the first human ever accepted into the program. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor as he walked toward his first class. Other students stared at him as he passed. Some whispered to their friends and pointed. Jake tried to smile and look friendly, but most of them looked away quickly. He found the right classroom and walked inside. The room was round with seats arranged in circles. Students sat in small groups talking quietly. Jake found an empty seat near the middle and sat down. A creature that looked like a tall blue person with silver markings on his face walked to the front of the class. This had to be the teacher, Professor Zenthka. Jake had seen his picture in the school materials. "Good morning, class," the professor said. His voice was smooth and calm. "Today we have a new student joining us. This is Jake Martinez from Earth." All the other students turned to look at Jake. He felt his face get hot and raised his hand in a small wave. "Hi, everyone," he said. A student with 4 arms and green skin raised one hand. "Professor, is it true that humans come from a dangerous planet?" Professor Zenthka nodded slowly. "Earth is what we call a high-challenge world. The environment there is quite different from most inhabited planets." Jake looked confused. Dangerous? Earth was just Earth. It was home. "Jake," the professor said, "would you like to tell the class something about where you come from?" Jake stood up and looked around the room. Everyone was watching him with curious eyes. Some looked worried. "Well," Jake said, "I grew up on a ranch in Montana. That's a state in North America. My family raises cattle there." A crystal student made a soft chiming sound that seemed worried. "Cattle?" she asked. "What are cattle?" "They're animals," Jake explained. "Big animals. Each one weighs about as much as a small car. We keep them in fields and take care of them." The blue student next to Jake leaned away from him. "How big?" she whispered. Jake held his hands apart to show the size. "A bull can be 6 feet tall and weigh 2,000 pounds. They have horns and can run pretty fast when they want to." Several students made worried sounds. The spider-like creature clicked its legs nervously. "You work with these dangerous beasts?" asked a student with purple fur. Jake laughed. "They're not really dangerous if you know what you're doing. My dad taught me how to handle them when I was little. You just have to be careful and respect them. "But surely you use advanced technology to control them?" Professor Zenthka asked. "Not really," Jake said. "Mostly we just use horses and dogs to help move them around. Sometimes we use trucks, but a lot of the work is done on foot." The room got very quiet. Jake looked around and saw that many students looked scared. "On foot?" the crystal student asked in a high voice. "You walk among these giant beasts on foot?" "Sure," Jake said. "How else would you check on them? You have to walk through the herd to make sure they're all healthy and count them." A small creature with big eyes raised a tiny hand. "What happens if one of these cattle attacks you?" Jake thought about it. "Well, you try not to let that happen. But my uncle got stepped on by a cow once, broke his leg. He was back to work in a few weeks, though." Several students gasped. One of them actually fell off his chair. "Your family member was attacked by a giant beast and only had a broken leg?" the purple-furred student asked. "It wasn't really an attack," Jake said. "The cow just didn't see him. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're actually pretty gentle most of the time." Professor Zenthka made notes on his electronic pad. Jake, what other animals live on your ranch? Oh, lots of different ones, Jake said, happy to talk about home. We have horses, dogs, cats, chickens. Sometimes we see deer, rabbits, and coyotes. There are bears in the mountains, but they usually stay away from the ranch. The word bears caused another round of worried sounds from the class. Bears? Asked the blue student. What are bears? They're like really big, furry animals with claws and teeth, Jake said. They can stand up on their back legs and be taller than a person. Most of them just want to be left alone, though. A student with scales and a long tail raised his hand. How do you protect yourself from these predators? Jake shrugged. You just stay alert and don't bother them. My dad always says that most wild animals are more afraid of you than you are of them. But what if they attack? The scaled student pressed. Well, you try to avoid that, Jake said. But people do get attacked sometimes. My neighbor got mauled by a mountain lion last year. The entire class went silent. Even Professor Zenthka looked shocked. Mauled? The professor asked quietly. Yeah, he was hiking and surprised it, Jake said. Spent a few days in the hospital, but he's fine now. Got some cool scars. Several students stood up and moved their chairs away from Jake. Others looked like they might be sick. Jake realized he had said something wrong. I mean, it's not that common, he said quickly. Most people never have problems with wild animals. But the damage was done. The other students looked at Jake like he was the most dangerous thing in the room. Here was a being who lived among giant beasts, walked through territories filled with predators, and talked about violent animal attacks like they were normal, everyday events. Professor Zenthka cleared his throat. Well, Jake, thank you for sharing. I think we should move on to today's lesson now. As the class continued, Jake noticed that no one sat near him. When he tried to join group discussions, students would find excuses to work with others. During the break, he ate his lunch alone while other students whispered and pointed at him. From across the room, Jake did not understand what he had done wrong. He had just talked about life on the ranch the same way he would talk to kids back home. But somehow, his normal stories about everyday life had scared his new classmates. He had no idea that what he considered a quiet, peaceful childhood on a Montana ranch sounded like survival training in a war zone to students from worlds where the most dangerous animal was something like a butterfly. The first day at Nexus Prime Academy was not going the way Jake had hoped. He was starting to realize that being human might make him very different from his classmates in ways he had never imagined. The next day, Jake walked into his atmospheric sciences class hoping things would go better. Students still stared at him and whispered, but at least no one had run away screaming yet. He sat in the back row where he could see everyone and tried to look as friendly as possible. Professor Veltar floated into the room. She was one of those crystal beings that made music when they moved. Her body looked like it was made of clear purple glass, and light seemed to dance inside her when she talked. Today, we will discuss extreme weather patterns, she announced. Her voice sounded like bells ringing softly. Each of you will share the most challenging weather conditions from your home worlds. A blue student with long, thin arms went first. On Altair Prime, we have dust storms during the dry season. The winds can reach 15 miles per hour, and visibility drops to only half a mile. Families must stay indoors for up to 3 days until it passes. Other students nodded and made sympathetic sounds. This was clearly considered very dangerous weather. Four-armed green student spoke next. Kesh experiences temperature fluctuations of up to 8 degrees during seasonal transitions. Citizens must change their clothing accordingly and sometimes require mild heating or cooling assistance. More nodding around the room. Jake tried not to look surprised. 8 degrees? That was nothing compared to Montana weather. Professor Veltar turned to Jake. What about Earth's weather patterns, Jake? What challenges do humans face? Jake thought about last summer when he and his friend Danny Cooper had gone camping in Colorado. It seemed like a good story to share. Well, Jake said, last summer, my friend Danny and I went hiking in the Rocky Mountains. We were camping for a week, just the two of us with backpacks. The room got quiet. Several students leaned forward to listen. On the third day, we saw some dark clouds coming in, Jake continued. Danny said it looked like a storm was building, so we started looking for shelter. A crystal student chimed nervously. What kind of shelter? Emergency bunkers? No, just somewhere to wait it out, Jake said. We found this rocky overhang near a cliff. Good thing too, because the storm hit us pretty hard. Jake remembered how exciting it had been. The wind had picked up first, bending the trees almost horizontal. Then the rain started, not gentle drops, but sheets of water falling from the sky, like someone was dumping buckets. The wind was probably going 60 miles per hour, Jake said. Rain was coming down so hard we could barely see 10 feet in front of us. Lightning was striking all around us, maybe every few seconds. A student with purple fur made a choking sound. Lightning? The electrical discharge phenomena? Yeah, Jake said. It was actually pretty cool to watch. The thunder was so loud it shook the ground. I got some great pictures. He pulled out his phone and showed photos of brilliant white bolts splitting the dark sky. The students closest to him moved their chairs back when they saw the images. You remained conscious during electrical bombardment? Asked the scaled student from yesterday. Sure, Jake said. We were safe under the rocks. Lightning usually hits the highest points and we were down low. My dad taught me that when I was little. Professor Veltar's crystal body was pulsing with worried colors. How long did this electrical storm continue? About 6 hours, Jake said. We just sat there and waited. Danny brought a deck of cards, so we played some games. When it finally stopped, we made a fire and cooked dinner. The four-armed student raised all 4 hands. You created open flame after surviving an electrical attack? Well, yeah, Jake said. We were hungry and the rain had stopped. We roasted some hot dogs and made s'mores. You know, marshmallows and chocolate between crackers. It's a camping tradition. Several students looked like they might faint. The idea of creating fire and consuming food after surviving what sounded like a natural disaster was beyond their understanding. Jake, Professor Veltar said carefully, you described this as a pleasant memory? Oh yeah, it was great, Jake said, smiling. Some of the best camping we ever did. The storm made everything feel so wild and alive. A student near the front actually did faint and slid off his chair onto the floor. 2 others helped him up and carried him toward the door. Is he okay? Jake asked, concerned. He will recover, Professor Veltar said. Please continue with your weather experiences. Jake decided to try a different story, maybe something less intense. Well, back home in Montana, we get pretty normal weather most of the time. In winter, it can get down to 30 below zero. That's when we have to be careful about frostbite. More gasps from the class. 30 below zero was apparently unimaginable to most of these students. My cousin Lisa Brown lives in California, Jake continued, trying to lighten the mood. She says earthquakes are just part of life there. The ground shakes pretty regularly, sometimes strong enough to knock things off shelves. The room erupted in worried chatter. Students were talking to each other in their own languages and none of it sounded calm. The ground moves? Asked a crystal student in a high, frightened voice. Sometimes, Jake said. Usually it's no big deal. People just get under doorways or sturdy tables until it stops. Lisa says you get used to it. Professor Veltar was taking notes rapidly. And tornadoes? We have heard reports of these atmospheric phenomena on Earth. Oh yeah, those happen in the Midwest mostly, Jake said. My Uncle Roy lives in Kansas. He's got a storm cellar in case a tornado comes close to his house. He says watching them form is actually pretty amazing if you're far enough away. Your family members voluntarily remain in areas where the atmosphere can form destructive vortexes? Professor Veltar asked. Well, where else would they go? Jake asked. That's where their jobs and friends are. You just learn to deal with the weather. Jake told them about hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, how his Aunt Karen Davis had ridden out 3 of them in New Orleans. He mentioned blizzards that could dump 6 feet of snow overnight, heat waves that reached 115 degrees, and hailstorms that could break windows. With each story, more students excused themselves from class. By the time Jake finished talking about a flash flood he had seen in Arizona, only half the class remained. Professor Veltar dismissed class early. As students filed out, Jake heard them talking in worried voices about the human who survived. Electrical bombardment for entertainment and lived on a world where the very atmosphere was trying to kill everything. Jake packed up his books, confused again. He had tried to share some fun stories about weather and outdoor adventures. Instead, his classmates looked at him like he was some kind of monster who enjoyed dancing with death. He was starting to think that maybe Earth was a little different from other planets after all. Jake walked into his zoology class on Thursday morning, hoping this would be the day things went better. The classroom was smaller than the others, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Students were already sharing pictures of their pet animals from home. Professor Kethra was a fuzzy creature about 3 feet tall with big friendly eyes. She reminded Jake of a teddy bear, except she was bright orange and had 6 arms. She seemed very excited about today's lesson. "Welcome, students," she said in a voice that sounded like she was always smiling. "Today we discuss companion animals from our homeworlds. These are the gentle creatures that share our lives and bring us joy." A blue student went first, holding up a picture on her tablet. "This is my flyer whisper. She is very small and eats flower nectar. She sleeps in a tiny house in my room and makes soft humming sounds." The creature in the picture looked like a butterfly crossed with a hummingbird. It was beautiful and delicate, no bigger than Jake's thumb. Other students shared similar stories. A crystal being showed pictures of creatures that looked like tiny floating jellyfish that glowed different colors. A 4-armed student talked about beetles the size of marbles that helped pollinate plants in her garden. All the companion animals were small, quiet, and harmless. Jake was starting to see a pattern. "Jake," Professor Kethra said, "would you like to share your family's companion animal?" Jake smiled and pulled out his phone. He had lots of pictures of Max, his family's German shepherd. Max was a great dog, loyal and smart, and always ready to play. "This is Max," Jake said, holding up a photo. "He's been with our family for 5 years now." The reaction was immediate. Several students made frightened sounds. A crystal student's body started flashing red warning colors. In the picture, Max was standing next to Jake's little sister. The dog came up to her waist and his mouth was open in a happy pant, showing his white teeth. "How big is this creature?" asked a scaled student in a shaky voice. "Max weighs about 75 pounds, Jake said. "He's not even that big for his breed. Some German shepherds can get up to 90 pounds. Professor Kethra was writing notes very fast. "And you say this predator lives in your home?" "Predator?" Jake asked, confused. "Max isn't a predator, he's a dog. Dogs are man's best friend." "But look at those teeth," whispered a purple-furred student. "And those claws." Jake looked at the picture again. He supposed Max's teeth did look pretty big if you had never seen a dog before. And his paws were large with black nails. "Dogs used to be wolves thousands of years ago," Jake explained, trying to help them understand. "But humans domesticated them. Now they're companions. Max loves people, especially kids. He would never hurt anyone in my family." "Wolves?" several students said at once. They were looking at Jake like he had just admitted to keeping a dragon in his bedroom. "What are wolves?" Professor Kethra asked carefully. "They're wild dogs that live in packs," Jake said. "They hunt together and can take down animals much bigger than themselves. But that was before they became pets. Max just plays fetch and sleeps on my bed." A student near the back actually got up and moved to a chair farther away from Jake. Jake decided to tell them a story that would show how gentle Max really was. "When I was 10, I got lost in the woods behind our house. I was out there for hours and it was getting dark. My parents were really worried. The class was listening with wide eyes. Max found me," Jake continued. "He tracked my scent through the forest and led my dad right to where I was sitting by a creek. Max stayed with me the whole time, keeping me warm and safe." "This predator tracked you through hostile territory?" asked a crystal student. "Well, yeah, but that's what dogs do," Jake said. "They're loyal. Max would do anything to protect our family." Jake showed them more pictures. Max playing with his sister Katie Nelson in the backyard. Max sleeping peacefully on the couch. Max wearing a silly hat at Christmas. But all the students could see was a powerful predator with sharp teeth living inside Jake's home, trusted around children, capable of tracking humans through wilderness. "Do all human families keep predators?" Professor Kethra asked. "Not all, but lots do," Jake said. Dogs, cats, sometimes horses if you have room. My friend, Tony Clark has 3 dogs and 2 cats. The mention of cats caused another wave of concerned sounds. Cats are smaller than dogs, Jake said quickly. Most of them weigh less than 15 pounds. They're really independent and clean. He showed them a picture of his neighbor's orange tabby, cat Mr. Whiskers, sitting in a sunny window. But cats are pure predators, Jake explained without thinking. They hunt mice and birds and small animals. They're really good at it too. A cat can catch things you would never expect. Several students were now taking notes like they were documenting the habits of dangerous aliens. You allow these predators to hunt freely around your homes? Asked a scaled student. Sure, Jake said. Cats keep the mouse population down. It's actually helpful. Jake realized he should probably mention some gentler animals. My grandmother has chickens. They're pretty, harmless. They just lay eggs and eat bugs. How big are these chickens? Professor Kethra asked suspiciously. About this big, Jake said, holding his hands apart. They have beaks and claws, but they mostly just walk around the yard looking for food. Even, the chickens sounded threatening to students whose idea of companion animals were creatures the size of butterflies. Then Jake remembered something that would surely show how peaceful his life was. Oh, and we have lots of wild animals around our property. Deer come into our yard all the time. They're beautiful and gentle. Wild animals enter your living space? A purple student asked in horror. Sometimes, Jake said. Deer, rabbits, squirrels. Last month, a family of raccoons got into our garbage cans. They made such a mess, but it was kind of funny watching them. Jake pulled up a video on his phone of 3 raccoons digging through a garbage can, their little hands working like tiny people hands. They're so smart, Jake said. Raccoons can open containers and solve problems. Their paws work almost like hands. To Jake, it was a cute video of clever animals. To his classmates, it looked like masked bandits with human-like hands breaking into human food supplies. These creatures invade your territory and steal your resources? Asked a crystal student. I guess you could say that, Jake said. But they're just trying to survive. We don't really mind. By now, most of the class was staring at Jake with a mixture of fear and amazement. Here was a being who lived peacefully with pack-hunting predators, allowed wild creatures to raid his home, and considered it all perfectly normal. Professor Kethra ended class early again. As students left, Jake heard them talking about the human who kept wolves as pets and let bandits steal his food while he laughed about it. Jake sat alone for a few minutes, looking at pictures of Max on his phone. He missed his dog and wondered what Max was doing right now, probably sleeping in a patch of sunlight or playing with his favorite tennis ball. He could not understand why his classmates were so scared of animals that brought him so much joy. Friday was Cultural Exchange Lunch Day at Nexus Prime Academy. Students from different worlds were supposed to share food from their home planets and talk about their eating customs. Jake was excited about this because he was getting tired of the bland nutrition packets the school gave him. The cafeteria was decorated with colorful banners from dozens of different worlds. Long tables were set up where students could display their traditional foods and explain them to others. Jake found a spot at one of the tables and unpacked his lunch. The school's food dispenser had done its best to make human-compatible meals. He had a turkey and cheese sandwich, some apple slices, a small bag of chips, and a piece of beef jerky that his mom had sent in a care package. Around him, other students were setting up their meals. A blue Altarian girl placed what looked like glowing blue cubes on her plate. They were perfectly square and seemed to pulse with soft light from inside. A crystal student arranged several geometric shapes that looked more like colorful building blocks than food. They were smooth and clean, like they had been manufactured in a laboratory. A 4-armed Kaishari student had brought what appeared to be flower petals arranged in pretty patterns. They smelled sweet and looked like they belonged in a garden rather than on a dinner plate. Jake's neighbor at the table was a gentle, purple-furred creature named Velen. She had been one of the few students who still talked to him, though she always seemed nervous when she did. "What is your meal, Jake?" Velen asked politely, pointing at his sandwich. "This is a turkey sandwich," Jake said, unwrapping it. "Turkey, cheese, lettuce, and tomato on bread." Velen looked confused. "What is turkey?" Jake realized he would have to explain. "Turkey is a bird. a big bird that we raise on farms. This is meat from the turkey. Velen's purple fur stood up all over her body like she had been shocked. Meat? You consume flesh? Other students at nearby tables heard this and started turning to listen. Jake suddenly had an audience of about 20 aliens all staring at his sandwich. Well, yeah, Jake said. Humans are omnivores. We eat plants and meat both. Omnivores? Asked a crystal student. What does this mean? Jake tried to think of how to explain it simply. We eat everything. Plants, animals, whatever gives us the nutrition we need. The crystal student's body flashed bright red. Several other students made sounds of distress. You kill living creatures for food? Velen asked in a whisper. We don't usually do the killing ourselves, Jake said, trying to make it sound better. We buy meat at stores. Other people raise the animals and process them. This did not seem to help. If anything, the students looked more horrified. You have organized systems for creature termination? Asked a scaled student from across the table. Jake was starting to realize this was not going well. Look, it's not as bad as it sounds. The animals live good lives on farms, and then they become food. It's been that way for thousands of years. He decided to try a different approach. My grandfather, Pete Harris, taught me to fish when I was little. It's actually really peaceful. You sit by a lake or river and wait for fish to bite your hook. The entire section of the cafeteria had gone quiet now. Students were staring at Jake like he was describing some ancient ritual of violence. You deceive aquatic creatures with false bait? Asked a four-armed student. And then you kill them with your bare hands? Added another. Well, you use a fishing rod, Jake said. And usually you hit them on the head quickly so they don't suffer. A crystal student made a sound like breaking glass. 3 students at the far end of the table got up and moved to different seats. Jake pulled out his beef jerky, thinking maybe he could explain how some food was preserved. This is beef jerky. It's dried meat that lasts a long time without going bad. He tore off a piece and put it in his mouth. The sound of him chewing what everyone now knew was dead animal flesh echoed in the quiet cafeteria. You consume the muscular tissue of defeated creatures, Velen said faintly. My Uncle Roy Davis makes the best barbecue in 3 counties, Jake said, trying to share something positive. He slow cooks ribs and brisket over hickory wood. The whole family gets together for his barbecues. The image Jake was painting was of humans gathering in groups to cook dead animals over open fires, while socializing and celebrating. To his alien audience, it sounded like ritualistic predator behavior. Your family pack celebrates successful hunts with fire ceremonies, asked a scaled student. I guess you could say that, Jake said, though we usually buy the meat at a store now instead of hunting it ourselves. You have commercial hunting operations? Velen asked. Jake realized he was making things worse with every explanation. He tried to think of the most harmless food example he could. Look, we eat lots of plants too, he said. Salads, vegetables, fruits. My mom makes great apple pie. What other creatures do humans consume? Asked a crystal student who was taking notes. Jake thought about it. Well, there's beef from cows, pork from pigs, chicken, fish, sometimes lamb or deer if you hunt. With each animal he named, more students looked sick. The idea that humans casually consumed dozens of different species was beyond their understanding. We also eat eggs from chickens, Jake added. And milk from cows gets made into cheese and butter. You steal the reproductive materials and nursing fluids of captive creatures? A purple student asked in horror. Jake had never thought of eggs and milk that way before. I mean, the chickens lay eggs anyway and cows make more milk than their calves need. A blue student near the back actually got up and ran toward the bathroom looking like she might be sick. Do you consume these creatures while they still live? Asked Velen in a tiny voice. No, Jake said quickly. We cook everything first. Heat kills bacteria and makes food safer. You apply thermal energy to dissolve the cellular structure of your prey, a crystal student said, writing furiously. Jake looked around the cafeteria. Students were whispering and pointing at him. Some were taking pictures of his food with their devices. Others looked like they might cry. He took a bite of his apple, hoping fruit would be less offensive. But even this caused concerned murmurs. Several students asked if the apple had been killed or if it had given permission to be eaten. Jake finished his lunch in silence while dozens of alien students watched him consume what they saw as the processed remains of multiple dead creatures. Each bite seemed to confirm their growing belief that humans were casual predators who killed without remorse and turned the death of other species into social celebrations. When lunch ended, Jake packed up his remaining food while students gave him a wide path to walk through. He heard whispers following him about the human who devoured flesh while laughing with his hunting pack and stole the life essence of helpless creatures for sustenance. Jake missed his mom's cooking and wondered if there was any way to explain that humans were not the monsters his classmates thought they were. By Monday morning, Jake had become famous throughout Nexus Prime Academy. Not the good kind of famous. Students would stop talking when he walked by. Some would cross to the other side of the hallway to avoid him. Others would stare and whisper to their friends. Jake knew he had somehow scared everyone, but he still did not understand how. Everything he had talked about was just normal life on Earth: ranch work, camping trips, pets, and regular food. But somehow his classmates saw him as the most dangerous being in the galaxy. He walked into his final class of the week, Comparative Civilization Studies. This was supposed to be about how different species lived and worked together. Professor Zenthka, the tall blue teacher from his first day, was setting up a holographic display at the front of the room. Today we will discuss adaptation and survival, Professor Zenthka announced. Each species has evolved to match their home environment. Jake took a seat in the back. Most of the other chairs near him stayed empty, even though the classroom was full. Jake, Professor Zenthka said, I think it would help everyone if you could explain something. In your first week here, you have shared many stories about your life on Earth. Your classmates have found these stories quite remarkable. Jake looked around the room. Everyone was watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I don't understand what's so remarkable about them, Jake said honestly. I just talked about normal stuff. Professor Zenthka nodded slowly. That is exactly what we need to discuss. What you consider normal would be considered extreme survival scenarios on most worlds in the galaxy. The professor touched a control, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed Earth, floating in space, blue and white and beautiful. Let me show you something, Professor Zenthka said. This is Earth compared to other inhabited worlds in the Federation. Numbers started appearing next to Earth's image. Temperature ranges, atmospheric pressure, geological activity, weather patterns. Then similar displays appeared showing other planets. Jake stared at the numbers. Earth's temperature range was huge compared to the others. Most alien worlds had temperatures that only changed by 10 or 15 degrees throughout their entire year. Earth's numbers showed changes of 80 degrees or more. The atmospheric pressure data was even more extreme. Most worlds had stable, unchanging air pressure. Earth's showed constant fluctuations, storms, and violent weather systems. Your world experiences temperature variations that would be fatal to most galactic species, Professor Zenthka explained. Your atmospheric conditions include electrical storms, rotating wind systems, and frozen water falling from the sky. A crystal student raised a glowing hand. Professor, is it true that frozen water falls on humans regularly? Snow and hail are common on Earth, Professor Zenthka confirmed. Humans not only survive these conditions, they participate in recreational activities during them. Jake thought about skiing and sledding and building snowmen. Things he had done since he was little. Activities that were fun. The geological data is even more interesting, Professor Zenthka continued. Earth's surface moves constantly. The ground shifts, mountains rise and fall, and molten rock emerges from beneath the surface. Jake mentioned that his cousin lives in an area where the ground shakes regularly, added Velen, the purple-furred student, and she considers this normal. Professor Zenthka nodded. Humans have adapted to live with constant environmental challenges that would evacuate populations on most worlds. More data appeared on the display. Jake saw numbers about Earth's biodiversity, predator populations, and something called hostile life form density. Earth supports an unusual number of predator species, Professor Zenthka said. Most evolved worlds eliminated dangerous creatures millions of years ago. Earth still has thousands of species capable of harming humans. But Jake lives peacefully with predators in his home, said a blue student. He showed us pictures. Domestic animals on Earth retain many predator characteristics, Professor Zenthka agreed. What humans call pets would be classified as dangerous fauna on most Federation worlds. Jake was starting to understand. His classmates came from worlds where everything was safe and predictable. No dangerous weather, no harmful animals, no environmental challenges. Earth really was different. Professor, Jake said, raising his hand, are you saying Earth is more dangerous than other planets? Not more dangerous, Professor Zenthka replied. Earth is what we call a high-variability world. Your environment constantly changes and challenges its inhabitants. This has shaped humans into remarkably adaptable beings. How did humans survive? Asked the scaled student. Professor Zenthka looked at Jake. Perhaps you can answer that. How do humans deal with all these challenges? Jake thought about his parents, Carol and Steve Martinez. They had taught him to be prepared, to pay attention to his surroundings, to stay calm when things went wrong. He thought about his friend, Tony Clark, who had joined the Marines after high school. Tony said the military training was tough but not impossible. I guess we just learn to handle whatever happens, Jake said. My parents taught me to be ready for different situations, check the weather before going outside, know what to do if you meet a wild animal, keep emergency supplies in your car in case you get stuck somewhere. You prepare for survival scenarios as part of normal education? Asked a Crystal student. Sort of, Jake said. We learn first aid in school, how to swim in case you fall in water, what to do in a fire or earthquake, basic stuff like that. The alien students were taking notes like Jake was describing advanced military training. My uncle served in the army, Jake continued. My friend Tony is a Marine, but most people never join the military. We just learn to take care of ourselves. Your species produces professional warriors? Asked a four-armed student. Some people choose that job, Jake said. But most humans work regular jobs, teachers, doctors, farmers, store clerks, normal stuff. Professor Zenthka made more notes on his electronic pad. Jake, do you see yourself as particularly tough or strong? Jake laughed. No way, I'm just a regular kid from Montana. There are lots of people way tougher than me. My grandmother is 75 years old and still runs her farm by herself. My sister Katie is only 12, but she can ride horses and help with cattle just like anyone else. The idea that Jake considered himself weak compared to other humans, including elderly females and children, was clearly shocking to his classmates. The remarkable thing, Professor Zenthka said to the class, is that Jake represents a typical human. His experiences are normal for his species. What we have learned this week is that humans have been shaped by their environment into natural survivors. Jake looked around the room and saw his classmates looking at him with new expressions. Not fear exactly, but amazement and respect. Jake, said Velen, would you like to sit with us at lunch today? And maybe tell us more stories about Earth? Added a blue student. But perhaps happier stories this time? Jake smiled. Sure, I could tell you about the time my family went to Yellowstone National Park. There are these amazing hot springs that shoot water high into the air. Several students looked worried again, but they also looked interested. Just remember, said a Crystal student, your normal stories are adventure tales to us. Jake realized that his week of accidentally terrifying his classmates had actually taught everyone something important. Humans were not monsters or super warriors. They were just people who had learned to live on a world that never stopped testing them. And maybe, Jake thought, that was something to be proud of after all.